scientists wired some human neurons to a computer chip. So let me just explain what's happening here. You know, neurons have what look like little tentacles on the cell. They're called dendrites. And they created a special computer chip with an opening called a port, and they could connect the dendrites on the neuron into that port. So now you have a biology silicon interface, all right? And then they loaded that chip into a computer that was hosting the game of Pong, all right? So these are isolated neurons. They're not attached to a human. They're in a petri dish wired to a computer chip. They put them in the computer, and here's what happened. All of a sudden, those neurons began to play the game Pong. They played the game successfully, and the longer they played the game, the better they got. They learned from playing the game. All right? Now, I want you to just think about what's happening here, and then we're going to explore this a little bit. How does a neuron not attached to a human know how to play a computer game that has been around since 1972? How can that happen? This is what the scientists were struggling with. Where are the instructions for the game? How can neurons in the petri dish know how to play that game? Where are the instructions? Well, if you've read any of my books in the past, like the book The Divine Matrix, if you've listened to people like Bruce Lipton, Joe Dispenza, you already know where we're going to go with this. Scientists released a report in the year 2012 and confirmed what many people have always sensed and suspected in their lives. There's a field of information that underlies all of existence, all right? There is a field of information, a field of energy that underlies all existence. Now, we've always talked about it in the New Thought community. We say, you know, of course. But from the scientific perspective, they struggled with that until the year 2012. If you want to know more about that, you can look it up, not now, but later. In the year 2012, the CERN superconducting supercollider in Geneva, Switzerland, released the paper that there is, in fact, a field of energy, and scientists now accept this. This is not controversial. The controversy is, what does it mean? Its existence is not controversial. So that field now is what many people in the past have called Akashic Records, or we've called it the Matrix, the Divine Matrix, the Planck field, zero-point field, all kinds of names. There's a field of energy. Energy is information. That's important. Energy is information. So how can these neurons in the petri dish know how to play this game? Well, here is the answer, and this is where your human body and the transhuman movement get really interesting in this conversation. The answer is that the instructions are not inside the neurons. All right, the information is not held in the neurons. You know, I was, like I said, I was born and raised in Missouri. When I was in college, Albert Einstein's brain was in a glass jar at a neighboring college, University of Kansas. And when Einstein passed this world, they kept his brain. They thin-sectioned his brain. They said, what makes Einstein's brain so different from everyone else? And you know what the answer is? It looked pretty much like everyone else's brain, with one exception. There was one exception. And what they found is that Einstein's brain had a lot more folds in the brain than a typical human brain. And what that means is when you take that brain and you stretch those folds out, it means there's more surface area. It means there's more neurons. All right, why is that important? What we now know is the instructions for those neurons to play Pong, they're not inside the neuron. The neurons, and this is the key if you're taking notes, the neurons in the experiment are antennae that tune to the place in the field where the memory of Pong lives. Okay, they're antenna. Your neurons are antenna. Your DNA are antenna. The cell membranes in your body are antenna. And all of them are tuned to signals that we're receiving from the world around us. This is why your body is so important. Your divinity doesn't live in your body. Your body is the antenna that tunes to the place in the field where that information lives. None of your memories don't live in your body. I mean, you have muscle memory. I'm a guitar player, so I have muscle memory, that kind of memory. But the memories of your past, of your childhood, of all of your relationships, of all of your hiking experiences, all those things, they don't live in your brain. They don't live in your cells. Your brain and your cells are the antenna that tune to the place in the field where that information lives. That's why telepathy is possible. That's why remote viewing is possible. The ability to sit in a chair in a room and allow your consciousness to move in the field to another physical location on Earth or even not on Earth. And they've done experiments now in other worlds. Experiments, for example, they were remote viewing in the 1970s when the first spacecraft were going past the planet Jupiter. And one of the remote, and I talk about this in the book, one of the remote viewers at that time wanted to remote view to see Jupiter before the spacecraft actually sent the images back. And so he did a remote viewing session. He allowed his consciousness to move in time and space to see the planet Jupiter. And what he reported was that there were rings around the planet Jupiter. Well, the scientists at that time believed that he missed his target because they said, there are no rings in Jupiter. You must have seen Saturn. You're reporting on Saturn. So they thought he missed his target. A couple of months later, the first images of Jupiter came back. Lo and behold, Jupiter has rings. They're made of a material different than Saturn, so they don't show up on the telescopes. Saturn is icy rings that reflect light. Jupiter's rings are made of a different material, dust, that doesn't show up on the telescopes. So his remote viewing knew more about the planet than we knew until the actual photographs come back. How is that possible? Because the field allows consciousness to move through time and space to different locations. My childhood memories, yours, they're all in the field. Now, there are a lot of implications, a lot of interesting implications around this when it comes to things like dementia. I lost my mom to COVID just a couple of years ago, and she was in late-stage dementia. And I got to see what happens when we lose our connection with the field. And there's lots of reasons why that can happen. So this principle opens the door to a lot of discussion, a lot of conversations. But what I want you to focus on right here, the antenna tune to the place in the field where Pong lives. What that means is the antenna in your body, the neurons, the DNA, the cell membranes in your body are antenna that tune to the place in the field where your divinity lives. Your whole body. Okay, DNA, membranes of the cells, neurons in the heart, neurons in the brain are the antenna that tune to the place in the field where divinity lives. So let me just ask you a question. If your body is the antenna and you begin to replace your body with synthetics, you begin to replace your natural chemistry and your natural biology with computer chips and chemicals and RFID chips and sensors, what does that mean for your body's ability to access your divinity? Well, there's a lot of you here, and I'm looking all over. I'm just going to tell you the answer right now. The more of your body that you lose to technology, the more difficult it becomes to access your divinity. That's the transhuman movement. The transhuman movement to replace us with that technology. Synthetic life cannot access divinity. So when you have problems thinking about this, come back to this experiment and just think about this. I mean, I'm still amazed, and I've shown this many, many times. isolated neurons are able to play a game because those neurons are tuned to the field where that game lives. Think about it this way. If you've ever tried to learn a foreign language, French, Spanish, Tibetan was hard for me. That's a very interesting language to learn. Or music, as a musician. If I'm trying to learn a piece of music, guitar music, there's a guitarist, Stephen Vai. Some of you know Steve Vai. He's an amazing guitarist. And when I'm trying to learn a piece of his music, or I'm trying to learn a foreign language, at first it's awkward and we go through the motions. Phonetically, we say the words of the language. On my guitar, I'm, awkwardly finding those notes. And all of a sudden, one day you wake up and you're thinking French, or you're thinking Spanish, or you're thinking Tibetan, or you're playing like Steve Vai. How does that happen? Here's the deal. It takes about 72 hours. I'll show you the slide in a little while. It takes about 72 hours for the neurons in your body to connect to other neurons to form the antenna that tunes to the place in the field that supports what it is that you're trying to learn.